Okay, Federico, we're back with another episode. Actually, it's episode 250 of App Stories. How about that? 250. That seems like I don't know, maybe a milestone. It's a lot of episodes, that's for sure. And it's brought to you today by Pillow, Devin Think, and Ulysses. How you doing?
That's a big number. Congrats to us. So it's we are
Yes.
well on our way to 1,000 episodes of App Stories.
We'll get there.
One-fourth
we'll
of the way there. We'll get there.
One week at a time. We got a ways to go, but we're on our way.
Look, we'll get there in 12 years, more or less.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
You just made me feel prematurely old, I think, like old in advance. All right, we're going to have to pick up the pace. Why don't we do 3 a week? Then we can cut it down to 4 years. Or is maybe that a little more talking and work than we need?
Yeah, that would be fun though. Anyway,
yeah, it would be fun.
We're doing a shortcuts.
We should talk about shortcuts.
Yes, we're doing a shortcuts for Mac deep dive today. So if you are an App Stories Plus member, you can get about 20 something minutes of extra shortcuts for Mac content. In the pre-show, I talked about some of the things that I've been doing with shortcuts and sort of these additional tools like Better Touch Tool and Keyboard Maestro. I've set up this incredible macro with Keyboard Maestro that I've shared on App Stories Plus. You can get the details there. You can find it in the show notes on the App Stories website if you are an App Stories Plus member. If you're not, appstories.plus, and you can get all the details to sign up there. That version of the show is longer, ad-free, comes out early, all the good stuff. But here, we're going to get into the new Shortcuts app for macOS Monterey. So before we do that, I think, John, we should start from the very basics and cover, because this is not something that I think a lot of people have necessarily paid attention to, how Shortcuts for Mac is different from previous automation apps. And you, especially over the past 6 and 7 years, you've been much more into automation on the Mac than I was, like when I was iPad only, and I'm still primarily working on the iPad Pro, but now I have to use the Mac more, not just for podcasting, but because my shortcuts need to be compatible with the Mac. So how do you see shortcuts as being different from, say, Better Touch Tool, Hazel, Keyboard Maestro, Alfred, all these automation tools for macOS?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize too much, but I do think there is a different perspective that traditional Mac automation brings to the table as compared to shortcuts. And by that, I mean that an awful lot of traditional automation on the Mac centers around either scripting the UI or taking actions on files. Whereas on iOS, where things started without a file system, or at least without user access to a file system, shortcuts was always data driven. It was, it dealt with things. I mean, you go back to the workflow days, some of that stuff in the background was using URL schemes, and it was passing data around using the share sheet, things like that. And you can still see those differences between shortcuts today on the Mac as it launches and shortcuts on iOS and iPadOS. But I think that those differences are worth keeping in mind, because I think if you've used things like AppleScript or Automator in the past, you'll find the approach that shortcuts takes, while there are similarities, there are also some interesting differences as well. And a lot of that comes down to its roots and how it was developed over the years. So I personally have more experience with shortcuts, so I guess I prefer that route. There's not one way that's right or wrong versus the other. And what's interesting about the Mac too is that you can mix and match this stuff. So even if you want to, you can use something like Hazel, which is very much a files-based automation tool. You can mix and match it with shortcuts. So there's a lot of power that comes from incorporating these third-party tools into your automations as well.
Right. Yeah, and the way I think about it when you mentioned scripting the UI, the way I think about it, so I started off many years ago when the iPad Pro didn't even exist. In the early years of MacStories, I started off with AppleScript, right? And I did it all: AppleScript, Automator, the first workflows in Alfred, triggering scripts from Launchbar, all that kind of stuff I used
Yep.
to do. Running shell scripts in Hazel. I used to have a personal Mac Mini server at Mac Mini Colo, back when it used to be called Mac Mini Colo. I had a personal Mac Mini server that would run all kinds of Hazel scripts, Hazel actions that had embedded shell scripts and triggering Apple scripts remotely. That was fun to do things like scripting Evernote from an iPhone
Right.
by going through Hazel running on a Mac Mini in Las Vegas. That was fun. So and really, so my interpretation of automation on the Mac was stopped there. And the way that I've always seen it is AppleScript and all these other tools are more about controlling apps and performing actions, whereas
Yes.
with shortcuts, and again, I'm generalizing here, but again, generally speaking, in shortcuts, it's more of a layer above where you're dealing with data, right? You are abstracting all of these things and you're saying, okay, communicate directly with this application, whether it's the Finder or Timery or Safari. Well, not Safari, unfortunately. Music, reminders, all these apps take the data. Don't change anything directly in the app until I drag in the action that I want to perform something. In shortcuts, you're dealing with variables, right? And until you
Right.
specifically create something like add a new reminder or write a document to the file system, you're just dealing with data and variables inside shortcuts.
Yeah, shortcuts are like a little mini app that you've built in the sense, right? As
Right.
opposed to a script that's controlling a different app.
Right. And before, if you wanted to do file automation, you had to control the Finder more or less. Like it was actually scripting the window, whereas with shortcuts, you are scripting the database layer. You're dealing with the actual data, not necessarily with the UI. And that to me is the biggest difference.
Yeah, and I think a good example of this is Safari, because if you look at where Safari stands with shortcuts on the Mac today, there are problems. That's one of my biggest criticisms of shortcuts for Mac is the lack of ability to do things like easily grab a selection from a web page and get all the different data bits from a web page like you can on iOS, like the name of the page and the URL and the summary of the page and all those things. You can't do that yet on shortcuts for Mac. And I think that that's in a way tied to this difference between the way things were historically done in things like Automator, because a lot of the new actions that we got with shortcuts for Mac came from Automator. And so they maybe have a little bit of that more file-based perspective, where in Automator, you would get the URL from the frontmost tab, right? And that would give you the URL of that tab. You had to actually grab that from that window, whereas on iOS, you can grab all sorts of bits of data related to a particular page that's open, the data on the page. It's not a matter of looking at a particular tab or something in the app itself.
Yeah. And so keep this in mind, right? Keep all of this in mind if you're approaching shortcuts for Mac and you're coming from previous automation tools.
Yep.
In shortcuts, you always have to manually create stuff, like whether it's a reminder or save a document, rename a document, even the simple things like taking a zip archive from a folder and using the extract archive action. That doesn't mean that the archive gets extracted to the Finder. Like I've seen Jason Snell talk about this a couple of weeks ago. It only means that you've extracted the file as a variable in shortcuts. You always
Inside
have
of shortcuts,
inside of
right.
shortcuts, like it's just a piece of data, a variable that is that only exists during the runtime, during the execution of the shortcut in the Shortcuts app.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can improve your health and well-being in more ways than one. Pillow is a simple sleep app that can help you become more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to help you improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch when you sleep. Pillow will take care of the rest, tracking and analyzing your sleep automatically and giving you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or an iPad, you can do that too with the press of a button. And if you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trends, variability, heart rate dips, and blood oxygen levels for each sleep session. You can even record sounds that occur during the night, like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might be interrupting your sleep. If your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of the sounds during your sleep session and give you a rating for each exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions about your sleep. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is that it helps you make informed decisions by giving you a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare sleep metrics with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before you go to sleep, or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps can help boost your productivity and focus, so if you have the opportunity to take one, use Pillow's Power Nap mode. Pillow can also wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm feature. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is a very privacy-minded app. All of your sleep data and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't have to sign up for an account or register to use Pillow. You can use it anonymously and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Pillow is free to download from the App Store and comes with a terrific set of features that you can use for free every day. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's an option for a 7-day free trial too. Just visit pillow.app to learn more and get started. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of MacStories.
Also, I think it's important to point out some of the key differences between shortcuts on iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. We mentioned this in the pre-show. Of course, third-party apps, they can trigger shortcuts directly on the Mac, whether it's via code or via the command line or via AppleScript. Third-party apps, including Apple's own script editor, for example, if you want to run some Apple scripts that way, they can trigger a shortcut. They can run a shortcut in the background without opening the Shortcuts app at all. This is how, again, you can do it yourself using the terminal or using script editor, using folder actions, for example, in macOS, you can do that. Or you can get third-party apps that can do this, like Keeper Maestro, Better Touch Tool, Alfred, anything that can run a command line script or an Apple script can also trigger a shortcut in the background on Monterey. And that's not possible on iOS. You can, of course, run scripts inside of shortcuts. There are new scripting actions that require your permission. You need to enable scripting actions in Shortcuts Preferences. You need to go to Shortcuts Preferences Advanced in order to use them. I believe they are disabled by default, but it's a checkbox. You can just go there and enable those. And you can, of course, manipulate windows, which we're going to talk about in a minute because of some problems that I'm having. And broadly speaking, there are some actions that are exclusive to the Mac, right? These are actions that most of them are coming from Automator, right? Stuff like Finder actions, for example. Get the URL of the current Safari tab. That is Mac only. The idea of the current Safari tab is not an idea that exists on iOS and iPadOS.
No.
So that's a Mac only action for now. And also keep in mind, I know that John loves this, there is no share sheet integration in Shortcuts for Mac.
No, there isn't.
You may be
drives me bananas.
Yeah, you may be used to thinking of running shortcuts inside of apps via the share sheet because that's the only way that you've been able to do so on iPhone and iPad. On the Mac, the share sheet is one, very different, and two, not an endpoint for your shortcuts.
No.
Like you literally cannot put them there.
No, the way to solve that, at least in part, it's not a complete solution, is to use services, because shortcuts, there's in the details pane in the right-hand panel on shortcuts for Mac, where you set up all sorts of settings for your shortcut. You can pick to make a shortcut a service, and that's where you apply a hotkey. So yeah, it's I think what's really cool to me about shortcuts for Mac, despite some of the friction and problems and UI stuff that we've seen, is that there are so many different ways to trigger shortcuts that it really pays to take some time and figure out what all of them are. There's
Right. What are all these ways that you can trigger shortcuts on the Mac?
all right. So let me try to run through that. I've got a hot tip to close out the list, which is you can start on the menu bar. You can put something up in the menu bar. Okay. I'm not a huge fan of that just because I don't like to crowd my menu bar, but you can do it. You can put them up there.
And you got to listen to them. Like you got a single, like this is one of the things that confuse me. It's not like you're pinning individual shortcuts to the menu bar.
No, it's a list.
It's a list.
That's true. That's a good point.
It's a list of your shortcuts.
Yes, there's a little mini shortcuts icon that appears in your menu bar, and when you click on it, you get a list that drops down of all the shortcuts that you've pinned there. And it's one of the places where the UI is a little weird, because if you mouse over it quickly, you can see the delay in the animation as the selection moves from shortcut to shortcut. I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe it's a Swift UI thing. In any event, you can put them in the menu bar. You can also create global hotkeys, which is fantastic. This is tied to services, which I mentioned. You have to, in the details pane, assign a shortcut to a service, which allows you to access it from the app's menu at the top, or by right-clicking in various parts of the UI to get to the services menu and trigger it that way. But when you create a service, you can assign a hotkey to it, and that makes it a global hotkey accessible from wherever you happen to be in Mac OS. And that's probably the most powerful. We'll get to some issues. I know you've had some problems with that,
yeah.
But the hotkeys are a nice way to do this. You mentioned already that you can do shell scripting and AppleScript and JavaScript automation to trigger shortcuts. You can do those things. You can also create quick actions. Again, this is from that details pane. You can check off the box for making a shortcut a quick action. And that means that when you're in that panel on the right, the preview panel for files in the Finder, there is a button that allows you to access your quick actions. They're also available from the right-click menu too. And then finally, the one that I have the tip about that I think not enough people know about is making little dock applets out of your shortcuts. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, this is only available by going to Shortcuts for Mac's File menu, and then the last option at the bottom is Add to Dock. Now, you may think, well, that's not so great. I don't want to have I don't want to have like 200 shortcuts in my dock, and you certainly don't. But once you've created this little applet, there's some things you can do with it. One is they can accept data, because you and I were talking about this earlier today. You have one that uploads images to our CDN, and you can just drag an image onto it, and it'll upload to the CDN immediately. It takes it as input. So that's nice. That's a good reason to keep something in your dock. But you can also drag them out, and when you drag them out so they're no longer in your dock, that doesn't mean they disappear. If you go to your user account under applications, and this is not the applications folder where your apps hang out. This is under your username on the Mac. It's a little confusing, but they're there still. And you can do a couple of different things. One is you can script them. So you can use AppleScript or the shell to run those that way. Or you can use something like Alfred. And once those things are there, they're indexed by Alfred, and you can just hit your hotkey combination and start typing the name of the shortcut. It pops up and you can run it. I mean, I've seen people doing things with Alfred, which are, Alfred has this whole workflow system that you can create workflows, and people have been using that to create Alfred workflows to trigger shortcuts. But the easiest way to do this, really, I think, is to create one of these applets that sits in your dock, and then just drag it off the dock, because then now you've got a little app that you can use with Alfred or a bunch of other apps like LaunchBar. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been using that tip myself for a shortcut that's in my dock.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Devon Technologies, the makers of DevonThink. Whether you're in the harbor or on the high sea, you need to know where you are and where you're sailing. If you have all the maps, books, and documents, DevonThink for Mac and DevonThink to Go for iOS will not let you down in your mission to help you navigate the 7 seas of information. Sailor jokes aside, DevonThink helps you get organized. DevonThink helps you organize your office, home office, and your digital life on the go. Look, everybody has loads of documents, bookmarks, notes, snippets, and it's hard to keep track of it all. That is, unless you have DevonThink, which elegantly handles all of that and a whole lot more in one neat, tidy, and organized place. Organize everything in whatever way makes sense to you, and let DevonThink's unique AI assist you all the way with filing and finding. And if that wasn't enough, smart rules and flexible reminders let you delegate all of the boring, repetitive tasks to DevonThink too. Also, on iOS, you can use shortcuts actions to integrate DevonThink to Go with your other apps. Of course, whatever you keep in your database remains yours. It's all stored locally and nothing is uploaded anywhere unless you say so. The app's flexible synchronization technology uses strong encryption, which makes sure that you have all of your important documents with you on whatever device you're working on and that it's all safe and secure. Use iCloud, Dropbox, WebDAV services, or synchronize directly. And of course, there's so much more, from email archiving and scanning to an embedded web server for sharing your data securely with your team. Right now, App Stories listeners can get a 10% discount on DevonThink and on upgrades to it with the URL devontechnologies.com/appstories. Again, that URL to get 10% off DevonThink and any upgrades is devontechnologies.com/appstories. Our thanks to Devon Technologies, the makers of DevonThink, for their support of the show.
So, some of the issues with shortcuts for Mac, I should say that the shortcuts app is getting a lot better in the beta track right now. If you have the beta of macOS 12.1 and iOS or iPadOS 15.2, there are a ton of shortcuts improvements. And my understanding is that Apple is really working on this and they're keeping track of all these big issues that folks are reporting on Twitter, Reddit, on blogs, on podcasts, all these places. I hope that they are aware that the SwiftUI rewrite of the app was problematic from a performance standpoint, and I believe they're working on it. And a lot of my shortcuts, like a lot of my problems that I've shared on Twitter before, they have been fixed in the beta. So hopefully this comes out publicly soon. So the biggest issue for me right now with shortcuts for Mac is actually two big issues. One, and I talked about this in the pre-show, so go check that out for more details on what I was trying to do. The choose from list action comes up on screen on macOS, and it's a very small window by default. It doesn't vertically expand to show you the complete list, or at the very least as long as possible, all the items contained in your list. It comes up and it's a small rectangle, and you have to scroll or manually expand this rectangular window. I don't understand why it's a small list.
These UI elements have been a really big problem since the beginning, and they have gotten a lot better. But yes, it still has a ways to go.
And the even bigger problem is that list cannot be filtered by name from the keyboard. So if you have a list of items and you want to quickly filter the items, which is something that you usually can do on a Mac by just typing the first few letters of their names, it doesn't work. And there's no search box either in the list. You can search lists on iOS and iPadOS. You cannot search lists on the Mac. I don't fully understand why. The other big problem is the one action that I really wanted to use called Find Windows. That is the basic action you need to use on macOS to perform any window manipulation. It takes, and I just tried this again on macOS 12.1 beta 3, so the latest beta version of Monterey. It takes 40 seconds to find a single window on my MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip. I literally just tried to find windows where the app name is Safari. Like one action takes 35, 40 seconds to run.
I have had the same problem, but not as severe. And I don't understand why, since your MacBook Pro is more powerful than my M1 MacBook Air or iMac. But I was trying to work on a shortcut that was, for instance, a setup shortcut for recording the show, where I would hit a keyboard shortcut and, I don't know, Audio Hijack would open and Craft would open and the various things in Skype, the things we need would open. And then all the other windows on my Mac would hide. And when I was putting it together, I thought it wasn't working because the windows were slow. And then I would start clicking around to figure out what I was doing wrong. And then all of a sudden the windows would pop into view. So I don't know what's going on there. It does seem a little slow. I don't think it's been quite as slow for me as it has been for you, but it has to be fast because it's not that hard to use something like Alfred and quickly open a few apps and move them around the screen. So it can't be something where if you have 3 windows that you're moving around, it's going to take a minute plus.
Yeah, so these are some of the issues that I've been having. There's some general UI flakiness and weirdness here and there.
Yeah,
but it's getting better. I think it is getting better. And
it is.
And of course, we mentioned some of the things that are missing, like the Safari actions are not working at all on macOS. There's no share sheet integration. But by and large, and here's what I wanted to get to with this episode, how are we using shortcuts on the Mac?
Yeah, I want to mention one other thing though, that in case people run into this.
Oh yeah, sure.
You and I have been comparing notes on various shortcuts, like existing shortcuts that we're adapting for use on the Mac. And I have run into in the last few days at least a couple of situations where something was working for you and it wasn't working for me, and I couldn't figure out why. And I don't, I think that there are still places where maybe it's working for you because you're on the beta and I'm not on the machine that I was using to do that testing. So maybe that's the answer. Or maybe it's just a little flaky and works sometimes, but not others. And I have to restart my machine to get it to work. But, I think if you're using shortcuts for Mac, you have to kind of expect that stuff for right now. But as you said, things are improving. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, I think. And we can now move on, Federico. Let's move on to how we're using shortcuts for Mac. I know you have a lot of things that you're doing, and I've been doing a lot too.
Okay, so the beautiful thing is that a lot of my sort of core shortcuts from iOS and iPadOS, they are now working just out of the box with no modifications necessary on the Mac as well.
Right.
For example, MusicBot, the all-in-one Apple Music Assistant, which I want to update for next year, but we'll talk about that in the future. It's now, it just works on the Mac. I can trigger it from the menu bar or with the keyboard shortcut. Again, share the details on this in MacStories Plus. And it comes up in the middle of the screen. Again, it's unfortunate. This list of actions that MusicBot offers is a small list on the Mac. It's a very small window, and hopefully this will look better in the future. But I can play my favorite albums, choose from my new releases. I can control the speaker's volume. I can do all these kinds of things, and it just works out of the box. I can search, I can manage playlists, all the things a MusicBot does, it can do on the Mac. My shortcut for triggering my saved timers in Timery, that's also working. That is the perfect shortcut to put in the menu bar, because whenever I start working on something, I can just, click it there and choose from a list, and I'm tracking my time based on what I'm doing.
Can I stop you right there for a second?
Sure.
Because Timery is one of those areas where I didn't historically use it a lot with shortcuts because it wasn't any good to me on the Mac. And that was a little bit of that was enough of a friction point for me not to use it much. And now that I've got it though, I absolutely love it. And I'm doing something similar, but a little different because I've tied those save timers to the Stream Deck, as well as a shortcut that
nice.
kind of is yeah. So what I have is a set that are, I'm going to be writing about this for the club. It's a set of the most commonly used timers that I have, plus another shortcut that runs something similar to yours, where it pulls up a menu and I can pick from kind of my other categories for when I'm doing something a little different. But it's been fantastic. And I've put on the Stream Deck, I've put a timer stop button on every single page that I have, because the one thing I'm bad about is remembering to stop my timers sometimes. And this way, even if I can, even if I start walking away from my desk, I can swing back, hit a button, and it stops without me having to actually, like switch over to Timery and hit the stop button that way. So it's been really nice.
That's very nice.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Ulysses, the ultimate writing app for Mac, iPad, and iPhone. Ulysses is a writing application made for people who love to write and who write a lot. And right now, Ulysses has an incredible offer for App Stories listeners. You can get 50% off on your first year on a Ulysses subscription by using the link in the show notes. The offer is valid for only 1 week, so take advantage of it now. If you haven't tried Ulysses, you really owe it to yourself to give it a try and use the special offer. It's an Apple Design Award winner, and its feature set is incredibly well thought out to boost your productivity through the entire writing process, while at the same time having a distraction-free interface that keeps you in the flow so you can concentrate on your writing and nothing else. It's suited to managing projects of all kinds and sizes, whether it's a blog, a novel, college essays, a diary, or a notebook. The app also has built-in grammar and style help to avoid mistakes and meet the right tone. It's available in over 20 languages, and it offers suggestions for things like capitalization, punctuation, semantics, redundancy, style, and more. After you're done writing, Ulysses can export in a whole bunch of different formats, including Markdown, plain text, rich text, text bundle, and you can create beautiful PDFs, docx files, and EPUBs. As a blogger, you can even publish directly from inside the app to popular platforms like WordPress, Ghost, Micro.blog, and Medium. If you're working with a character limit or on a tight deadline, Ulysses allows you to set writing goals to help you achieve those targets. Because it's on the Mac, iPhone, and iPad too, all of your documents are with you, no matter where you are or whatever device you're working on, which is a terrific advantage. Moreover, the developers are continually maintaining and improving the app too, with new features and adapting to the latest technologies of each of Apple's OSs. Ulysses is the writing app of choice for thousands of book authors, bloggers, journalists, academics, and other writers for a good reason, because of its unique combination of simplicity and power. To learn more, go to ulysses.app and be sure to check out that link in the show notes to get 50% off your first year of Ulysses. Ulysses, the ultimate writing app for the Mac, iPad, and iPhone. Our thanks to Ulysses for their support of the show.
All these core shortcuts that I have, like one shortcut that triggers my dashboard menu, which is a macro that I have in Obsidian that I can trigger from the menu bar. My shortcut to save interesting links for MacStories Weekly, I adapted it very easily to the Mac by just using the get URL from Safari action, which is one of those Mac-only actions that we mentioned before. But then I've also been doing like some new shortcuts that are specific to macOS. Like, for example, I made a couple of shortcuts that in the Music app, they trigger the Up Next or the real-time lyrics sidebar in Music. Like, that's the kind of thing that you can do. These shortcuts are running a better touch tool command to view a specific menu item. And this is the kind of integration that you can have, right, on macOS between different kinds of automation tools, with shortcuts sort of being the glue between all of them. And this aspect of shortcuts on the Mac being sort of the central hub for automation is something that I'm exploring now with my more advanced shortcuts that I'm either optimizing for the Mac or making specifically for macOS. I wrote about this in MacStories Weekly last Friday, and you really can get an example of this with my append to dashboard shortcut. So this is a shortcut that I created on iOS and iPadOS, and it lets me save some text, not just at the bottom of a text document, which you may be familiar with, like you have a text document and you want to append some text to the bottom of the document. This one, it lets me append text, sure, but at the end of a specific section of the document. So I have this dashboard note that is organized in sections. They are standard markdown headers, like H2 headers. One is called On My Mind, and the other is called Working On. And, I have 3-4 sections there. And this shortcut, it lets me append text at the bottom of a specific section so that I can save something that is on my mind or something that I'm supposed to be working on, right? Or I have another section called Cool Things, where I just drop links to like YouTube videos or albums, like stuff that you tell me, that Twitter tells me. It's that kind of note. It's a dashboard note. Now, on iOS and iPadOS, you run it from the home screen. You run it from Siri. It prompts you for text. Totally works. On the Mac, you can also trigger this with a global hotkey, and it prompts you for text anywhere on the system. Now, the beautiful part of all of this is that whether you're running it on iPhone or iPad or on the Mac, it picks up the correct document from Files or from Finder on the Mac. And it always works. Like, it gets the contents of the document and it modifies the document. And what I really love about what I've been doing here is that the same shortcut can be used, like you just need to install the shortcut and it runs everywhere. But on the Mac, I can also make these additional sort of helper tools for it. And that's just not possible on iOS. So for example, I've also shared in the newsletter a pop clip extension that I've made. A pop clip is this excellent utility for macOS that is like a custom copy and paste menu that has actions in it, right? You select text anywhere on the Mac and the pop clip pop-up sort of pops up, right? Just above your text selection.
Yeah, right.
And it's got actions in it. And also, as of the latest version of pop clip, shortcuts can be these little buttons in the pop clip menu. And so what I've done is I've made a very simple extension that triggers my append shortcut for selected text. So anywhere you are on macOS, you can select some text in Mail, in Notes, in Safari, in Twitter.com, whatever you want to use it from, and you can trigger the shortcut. And of course, because this is macOS, the shortcut runs in the background. It takes your input text and it asks you, hey, where do you want to save it in your note? And you click OK, and it's done. And so shortcuts, you can use it as a shortcut, right? You can pin it to the menu bar, you can pin it to the dock, you can trigger it with a global hotkey, but you can also make it part of your other automations. And so these other apps, they become part of the conversation on macOS.
Right.
And so you have Keyboard Maestro, you have Pop Clip, you have Launch Bar, Alfred, like all these additional tools with shortcuts, at the center of it all, and this ecosystem of other automation utilities around it. And I think it's a very fascinating story.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty amazing what you can do. And I feel like one of the issues I'm having right now is my attention is pulled in so many different directions on what I want to build. But I've been doing a lot of the same things as you, just kind of exploring how my simple and existing shortcuts work, and also building some new things. I mean, from my standpoint, I've been doing things like, I have a shortcut that creates different sorts of link lists for MacStories, because I'm constantly either creating like a markdown bulleted list or just a plain list of links for the newsletter or for show notes or things like that. And so I've been using that as a menu bar shortcut, which has been really handy for me. I've also adapted a markdown block quote plus link shortcut that I use a lot on iOS, where I just highlight some text and I save it to an Obsidian document so I have it for reference for research that I'm doing or something else like that. It's a handy shortcut that I use all the time. And then we have things like one of the things you can do on shortcuts for the Mac is you can take a screenshot And you can kind of compress the steps here where, instead of hitting the keyboard combination and then deciding whether you want to have the whole screen or select a window, you can kind of collapse those steps into a single shortcut trigger that then, for me, uploads that image that's taken up to our CDN. So all of a sudden, I have one keyboard shortcut combination that takes a screenshot of a window, uploads it, and then returns the URL to me on the clipboard that I can drop into a story. And then another thing that I've been working on is some new and simple stuff that I've been using Good Links again. Good Links is, a place to save URLs. It's kind of a read later service combined with a bookmarking service in a way. And so I save things there throughout the week. And I have some that are tagged for MacStories Unwind, and some that are tagged for this show, and some that are tagged for the newsletters that we do. And this way, the shortcut just pulls up those links by tag so I can see them all in one place very quickly without opening the app, and then access each one of those, which kind of speeds up my day. And then another thing I've been doing, which because of the issues with showing windows, I've kind of put the brakes on for now, is task-oriented setups where I am opening apps or bringing apps to the front, hiding others, and then starting timers with things like Timery, which is pretty cool. And all of this I've been tying to the Stream Deck so that it's all push button. I've got, icons there that are visual and allow me to trigger them there if I want, instead of having to remember keyboard shortcuts or go up to the menu bar and that sort of thing. So it's been pretty cool. I mean, there's new things that I'm working on. I don't know if have you used Federico HomeBot at all? It's a pretty cool.
I don't really do a lot of home automation stuff, mostly because Sylvia hates it. So.
Yeah, Jennifer kind of does too, but sometimes she doesn't know, so it's okay. Like I have a way, like I'm home alone by myself most of the day, so I have a trigger that can set the thermostat, for instance, very easily, which is really handy. And the other thing I've been exploring, and it kind of goes hand in hand with what you were talking about with third-party apps, is the ability to create tools to help create other tools. So I have a shortcut that generates AppleScript that you can then use for other things. And I have another one that actually generates pop clips that I'll be writing about soon for the club. And they're just ways to kind of short circuit a lot of the repetitive copying and pasting of names of shortcuts and other things into AppleScript. Because, the AppleScripting for shortcuts is super simple. I mean, it's just like the command line, really. You just have to tell shortcuts to run this particular shortcut. But if you have a lot of shortcuts, and you want to turn them into, say, doc applets, you can have a shortcut generate all those scripts for you, and it makes the process a lot faster. So I've been building some tools to help me build more shortcuts in the future, which I'm pretty far down the road to that. I think it'll be handy once I'm finished.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of possibility here, and that's what's exciting, I think. And it doesn't take away at all from the work that we've been doing with shortcuts on iOS or iPadOS. In fact, it adds to it, because now we can reach.
It makes it more powerful.
It makes it more powerful, and we can make the same shortcut can be useful to a lot more of our readers, right, and listeners.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be like, and if you are a Mac user, get this separate version. No, it's the same shortcut. It's one shortcut. It just behaves differently, and it can do different things on the Mac. And there's ways, of course, this is where we come in, right? There's ways that we can properly design our shortcuts in such a way that they are optimized for macOS. That's what I've been sort of studying and starting to do myself. And it's definitely what we're going to continue doing, because now we have the opportunity to have a very simple message, which is, this is the same shortcut, one shortcut that we made, and it behaves appropriately based on the platform where you run it on, whether it's an iPhone, an iPad, or macOS. And I think that's the most powerful thing that Apple has done here, which is they haven't made like a separate app. It doesn't require a separate file format or anything. It's shortcuts. It syncs with iCloud. It runs all of your existing shortcuts, and it can do some things that are Mac specific. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really interesting to me is that there are so many different ways to do the same thing now on the Mac in particular that it really pays to think about what is the best way for what you're trying to accomplish. Is this something you're only going to do on your Mac and therefore maybe, using a Mac only tool is the way to go? Or is this something that you also want to do on iOS as well? So you should really maybe focus more closely on shortcuts. I mean, one of the things that I've only just scratched the surface on that I'm trying to create is a way to speed up a lot of the repetitive tasks that I have each week for things like preparing to produce app stories, which requires the creation of several documents in Obsidian. It requires pulling data from sponsors. It requires getting the files all lined up in particular folders. And so I'm working with a combination of shortcuts, data jar, and other apps that I think are going to, and even Obsidian's templating systems, right? Because it has its own automation tools kind of built and baked right into the plugin system. And combining those in a way that works seamlessly both on the Mac and the iPad so that I'm able to do the exact same thing no matter what device I happen to be on. All right, Federico, I'm sure that we're going to be speaking about shortcuts an awful lot in the future. I mean, there's a lot to dig in here, and I know that
there's a lot to digest for sure. There's a lot. It's a lot of information all at once, all these different possibilities that you have.
Yeah, it is. And, things are still moving with the app. It's improving with every single, beta that's coming out. So I think that there'll be new things to talk about there as well in the app itself, which will open up new possibilities, which I'm excited to try. So we'll be back with more of this stuff, and we'll go into more detail on some of the things that we're creating. We've got a long list of ideas and things that we'll be sharing here on MacStories and, of course, on Club MacStories. So stay tuned for that. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode. That's Pillow, Devon Think, and Ulysses. If you want to subscribe to App Stories Plus, Federico mentioned that at the top of the show. It's an extended version that's ad-free and in high-res audio that you can subscribe to at appstories.plus. So check it out there. You can learn more about what we offer as well as sign up there. And you can find Federico on Twitter and Instagram. He's at Viticci on both. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.